There's been a lot of talk in the media over the past few months about potential power issues right across Europe over the winter, in some cases with planned brownouts, in other places they're just expecting just power cuts. And obviously, that's concerning. People find that stressful. But you don't need to spend a huge amount of cash to be pretty well prepared for short-term power cuts, which is all they're likely to be in this instance. If you've got a situation where, a major storm takes, cables out and so on, they can go on for days. What we're likely to be facing this winter isn't really going to be as permanent. It's likely to be, a few hours at a time or an evening at a time. But it's pretty simple to be prepared for that, and you can keep it simple and build as finances allow. But so I thought I'd give you a quick look at what we do for planned power cuts and also for just, power outages. We live fairly remotely. We don't have many power cuts, but when we do, it's not a problem. First thing we do is we got a drawer that just, when the power goes out, you've usually got your phone or something within reach so you can, switch a light on and, find your way across the room. There's usually a certain amount of background light anyway. So get to the drawer, open the drawer. First thing I come across is a head torch. Now I got fancy, lightweight head torches and so on in the camping gear. Don't have to go scrabbling around for them. This is a really simple one that's USB chargeable. So don't have to worry about looking for batteries or they've run out or whatever. It gets used fairly often. In fact, we've got two of these. One's in use, one's fully charged in the drawer. When one of them runs out, it goes on to charge. When it's fully charged, they get swapped out. So we always know that the one in the drawer is fully charged and good to go. Switch that on. It's got all sorts of modes and stuff. All I really need is off and on. I don't get on with all the other modes. Bright and low, sometimes useful, but mostly it's just a switch on to get a job done. We use it if we've got to go out to see to something at night when it's dark out, especially in winter. The sun goes down about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So yeah, just really useful things. Now this isn't going to be something that you're going to run all evening. It's just something to, get going. And as soon as the power's back on, you've got, USB adaptability. You can just plug it straight in, get it back to charge, and you're ready for the next one. Really useful, and you don't have to worry about batteries. But speaking of batteries, the next most useful thing you can have is a power bank. And of course, most people have already got one of these. They're really useful. You can't really function easily without a smartphone these days. So one of these that'll have 3-4 charges in is really useful. They take a while to power up. They do need to be run down like 2 or 3 times a year and then charge back up again. But if you're a household with 2 or 3, sets of electronics, most people have a phone. So if you're a few people in a household, if everyone just uses this to charge their phone one day, it's run down and switch it on, to charge again straight away. You are susceptible to being left without power if that does happen, if you get a power cut while that's on charge, which is why we've got 2 of them. 2 of them that are reasonable sized is more useful than just one big one, for the same reason. If one of them turns defective, just packs in for whatever reason, because electronics, they always work until they don't. And they never go at a good time. You never find out it's not working at a convenient time. It's when you need it, because that's when you got to pick it up. So it's useful to have 2. So if one of them, packs in, we've got one that's already charged, good to go. So we've always got power. And also, if we just finished running it down, and that's when we have a power cut, it doesn't matter. We've still got one of these. Now, these, of course, are useful for charging phones and other electronics, and for emergency use, especially power cuts. Quite often happen during major weather events and so on. Having an emergency communication system is really useful. So something like this that'll keep your phone going for days at a time, especially if you're not using it for apps and so on. You switch everything off that you don't need to and just use it for emergency phone use. It'll last for days. And with one of these to extend it, you can go for a week or 2 very easily. But they can do more than just charge your phone. These are really cheap. This is a string of LED fairy lights. These use very, very little power. In terms of evening use, perhaps 6-7 hours an evening. One of these will run one strip of this for about 4 days, 4 evenings, and you still have best part of a charge for a phone still in it. So you've still got a bit of emergency communications, and you've got lights. Now, this isn't going to be a focused light if you're going to do a particular task. That's where the head torch comes in. But again, this is something that doesn't need a battery. It's something you've already got. Now this is obviously just a spare that I've pulled out of the emergency drawer. But we've got these strung up under all of the cabinets over the work counters in the kitchen. So if you go into the kitchen to do some cooking, you just take the power bank with you, plug it in, and is that the right way? And we got lights. And because that is strung underneath the worktop, the light's projected down exactly where you need it, nice and diffuse. You can cook easily. You can, see, lights up the room enough that you can see your way around really easily, and doesn't use much power. More importantly, I think in a lot of situations, if you want a background light in a room that you're not necessarily in all the time, so if you're living between, say, your living space and your kitchen, you might choose to run a candle. We'll come to candles in a minute. You might choose to burn a candle in your living space because you're all in there. But if you're using the kitchen intermittently, you don't really want a candle burning. It's it's a fire risk. You're leaving it unattended in a space. It's not a great idea. Whereas something like this, just no fire risk at all. Really, really safe. We've also got them in a few other spots around the house. We will eventually have them in recesses and so on, just because with a bit more of this and a couple more of them, the power goes out, it doesn't matter, we're good for days. If the power continues to be out, you can recharge this, of course, from your vehicle when you're out and about. If you're working, you can go to work and charge it there, just to give it a bit of a boost and top it up. You can get ones that got solar panels built in. They're okay just for keeping it topped up, like a float charge. They're not so good, you can't stick it in your window and run it again that night. But, if you left it there for a week, it would make a big difference. But, a useful thing, but not crucial. Power is more important than anything else. So that's your emergency straightaway lights. Beyond that, say if it stays out for a day or two, you might actually start to run low on some of your power. And you might choose, all right, we'll keep that just for emergency communications or whatever. Then you can go for old school candles. Now these are obviously, really, the long tapered candles. We've got, buy them by the box, stick them away. Don't very, very infrequently use them because we haven't had a long-term power cut in a long time. And we also have these ones. These are 7-hour tea light type. So they got their own little holder. They do get hot, so you've got to have holders for all of these. You don't want to just put them on a surface and light them and walk away. Obviously, it's a fire, in an open flame in an area that you're living in, especially in a power cut. You're not necessarily paying attention to where things are going away neatly or tidily. You might have more bedding and warm stuff laying around, especially in winter. So you've got to be very careful, of course, with exposed flames. But these I rate heavily because these burn for 7 hours and they're brilliant. But no matter which sort of candle you go for, be it an old-fashioned tapered candle or one of these tea light candles in a pot, you're much, much better off, if you possibly can, having a specific candle holder for them and having it shaped for the specific type of candle. It stops the flickering, gives you a much more pleasant light. And you get a really pleasant light from a candle. It's a nice, warm, golden kind of light, especially if you're a bit on the cold side. That can, which if the power's off, you don't necessarily have your heating running. Something like this, that nice warm glow really helps, but you can't leave it unsupervised. So yeah, candle holders, absolutely brilliant. It gives you a much more steady light, and it makes the candles burn more efficiently with less smoke. All right, so that's light taken care of. In terms of cooking, because that's your immediate concern. For most people, if the lights are off, no one's having a nice time, you can't even see. With lights taken care of, everything else is secondary. But the second most important thing probably is going to be keeping warm. Now, a couple of options. One is there's all sorts of videos all over the internet for heaters featuring tea light candles. And you've already got them in the drawer from, for light. You can use them as an emergency heat source. I've actually done a video on this where I test it in as opposed to an unheated space versus a space with, I think it was 6 of these running a heater. I'll put a little, I'll put a link up, a little card up, so you can have a click on that if you're interested. It's not the world's most efficient heating system. You're using candles to heat. It's not the best. You wouldn't want to try and heat a space with it, but in terms of just taking the chill off a space, it definitely works. We run carbon monoxide detection and all sorts. So, no, it's absolutely safe. That's been proven by this video. but it's all right for taking the background chill off, but you're not going to be warm. You know, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference unless you're in a very confined space. What does make a huge amount of difference is a hot water bottle, and it doesn't have to be something like this. I've used Nalgene bottles when I've been backpacking. Just fill it with hot water, wrap something warm around it like a blanket, and you're going to be warm. Because with this small amount of hot water, you can turn it into a huge amount of comfort because you're in contact with it. And conductive heat is the most efficient form of heating that there is. If your feet are cold, you're miserable. Put that under your feet for a couple of minutes and you're warm, you're comfortable, and all of a sudden you're having a far more pleasant evening. Similarly, if your hands are cold, you know, pop this into your lap, put your hands on it for a few minutes and you're gonna be warm. A few hot water bottles wrapped in blankets is a huge amount of comfort, and probably a better option than the candle heater, to be honest. If it's really cold, you can go with both. But again, you can, you know, this will keep you warm at night, whereas I didn't really want to run these, you know, the candle heater in a space that I was, you know, sleeping in. I'm really quite cautious of carbon monoxide, but more importantly, because I've tested that, you know, that's safe at least with 6 candles. But I'm more concerned about fire. You know, if an unattended fire, things, you know, your bedding slips or whatever in the night, it's just, I'm not risking it. You know, it's as simple as that. Whereas a hot water bottle, you've still got that and you're tucked up anyway. You know, you don't need to heat the space, you just need to heat yourself. So that's your heating taken care of. In terms of cooking, you can go with pretty much any type of camping stove. But the ones I tend to use now, we've got different systems in place now. That means that, you know, we don't use this. So I've pulled this out of the shed. It's battered. I'm just using it as an example. But this style of cooker, I think, absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't, you know, if I was going away somewhere camping for 2 weeks, I wouldn't take one of these because you're going to go through an awful lot of gas canisters. But these things, they're small enough, they're really easy to swap in and out. You can store them in the back of a cupboard really easily. They're not going to come to any harm. They're not going to go off. Similarly, this shoved in the back of a cupboard is absolutely fine, but it's low and it's flat and it's stable. So it's much more safe. You can put this on top of your existing hob in most cases, you know, your cooktop. Just put this on top of it and cook exactly as you would normally. But what I like most about these is this switch here at the front. You clink that off and it disconnects the gas bottle. So when you're not in use, it's disconnected. You can't leak gas into the space that you're in. Because these things, you know, they're not expensively built. They're really cheap and cheerful. You know, I don't like a mechanical valve that I've got to rely on. If I disconnect it, that's it, it's good. You know I'm not going to have a seep. And if you're using a big, like a gas bottle that you have to use a spanner to connect, you know, like a big propane bottle, you've got to switch that off every single time that you use it. And I still don't really like having one of them in the house. It's, yeah, that's a lot of fuel capacity in a very confined space. So we got lights sorted, we got cooking sorted, we've got heating sorted. You're going to be relatively comfortable. The only issue moving forward beyond that is if the power's been off for a couple of days and it's still going off, you might run into difficulties with things like your electric freezer. Now, as long as you keep it completely closed, especially in winter, your freezer's good for days and days. It's not going to be an issue. If it's been off for a while and you're starting to become concerned, one option is a cheap inverter. This is just one that runs, I mean, you know, it plugs into your what used to be a cigarette lighter on a vehicle. Just a 12 volt power supply, and this supplies 240 volt. There's a 110 if that, you know, that's your area, but 240 for the UK, and you can run a 240 volt appliance off your car's engine while it's running. You wouldn't want to do it without it running. You'll just drain your battery straight down. But with your engine running, you're running off the alternator. Now, you wouldn't want to think, great, we'll plug one of these in, we'll run an extension lead into the house and we'll just carry on living like normal. Your car or your van or whatever, an internal combustion engine is a power plant for providing forward motion. It's a really inefficient generator. But if your freezer has been off for a few days and you really are getting concerned, it is an option that you can just plug this in, run an extension lead into your house, if you can do it. I mean, if you're parked miles away from your home, you know, you've got an issue. But if you can park reasonably close, run an extension lead in and run your vehicle for an hour, you're going to use quite a bit of fuel. It's not a really efficient way of doing it, but it means that you could potentially be spending a few quid to save a lot of money in wasted food. In terms of inverters, you pay for what you get. This is a really cheap one. It's something that I've got just for emergency use. I think I've used it a couple of times and it's worked well. I wouldn't want to use any expensive electronics with it. It's a bit of a blunt instrument. You can get much better quality ones that are designed specifically for running electronics, but just for running the odd thing in the van when I'm away if I need to, but also for backup use for running the freezer if absolutely necessary, and it works perfectly well for those sort of things. I wouldn't want to rely on it long term. It's a very cheap thing. It won't last forever, but for an emergency situation you don't need to spend a great deal. What you do need to do is make sure that this is 1500 watt. That's a lot more than my freezer is, but you do need to check that to make sure it's capable of carrying the load. But it's a really good cheap insurance policy for potentially hundreds and hundreds worth of frozen stuff in your freezer. So that's been hopefully useful to someone. I'm not a big fan of spending a huge amount of cash. You could get a big battery bank and use solar panels and all the rest of it and spend tens of thousands if you want. But really, just for being prepared for the odd evening's power outage, it's not a huge deal. You don't have to spend a massive amount, and it doesn't really need to impact your life massively. You're not going to be able to watch your screen for a little while. You're not going to be able to watch TV. It doesn't matter for an evening. And you don't have to spend a great deal.